This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 365 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Firstly, let me pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today. I chatted recently with author and journalist Monisha Rajesh, who many of you will know from her train travel books like Around India in 80 Trains and Around the World in 80 Trains. And she has a new one out, Moonlight Express, all about sleeper trains. So I think that long-distance train travel, something I've done a fair bit of in my younger years, is a super good fit to a thoughtful travel ethos. So in this chat with Monisha, we speak about her ideas on travelling thoughtfully, and we get to hear a few of her very favourite onboard experiences, including dining cars and great people and, all sorts of goodies. We actually chatted for almost an hour, and I gave up trying to edit down to my usual half hour because all her stories were brilliant. So I am sure you'll enjoy the listen as well. I started out by asking Monisha one of those mean kind of who is your favourite child type questions. Does she have a train trip that continually pops back into her memory?
Yes, it's a train called the Moonlight Express, and it's in India. It's a train that I first did in 2010 when I went around India in 80 trains for my first book. And it's a train, it's actually a service, the Moonlight Express, because there are quite a lot. I'd probably say about 9 or 10 different trains that actually do the route from Bombay down to Goa. It goes from, officially Mumbai station down to, I think it's Madgaon in Goa. But it's a 12-hour journey, and it leaves at 7 a.m. and it gets in, if you're lucky, at about 7 p.m. I mean, I have been on there at 10 o'clock at night and thought, this is starting to get a little bit much because I'm quite tired and quite up for bed now. But it's an extraordinary journey because it travels down the western coast of India, and it's got the Arabian Sea on one side and it's got the Sahyadri Hills on the other, which I say hills, they're actually just an amazing mountain range. And from the moment this train sets off, it literally takes you through the guts of, suburban Bombay, and you see everything. You see the kind of the city basically coming to life in the morning at 7 a.m. You see the skies lighten. You can see the birds kind of set off and do their thing. You can actually literally watch people bathing outside the back of villages. You can see kids getting dressed ready for school. And then you sort of take off into the countryside, and you just get this amazing slideshow of different states from Maharashtra down through to Goa, through to eventually it actually ends in Kerala. But you've got the ocean on one side, and you've got Indian trains always have the doors open, which is, huge safety issue, but that's just how they travel. And so you've got this wonderful, warm, salty air billowing right through the carriages. And I always travel in the compartment that's got barred windows rather than air conditioning because it's freezing up in second class. But down in the general class and in third class, the windows are barred. You've got warm air coming through. It's really sunny and bright and lovely. And you've got hawkers coming up and down the aisles all the time, bringing fresh food. The Moonlight Express is really famous on Indian railways for having what they call a pantry car. So the dining car, you can't actually sit in there, but they've got a huge kitchen, and the woks are always hissing and sizzling, and you can smell everything that's cooking in there. You can see them chopping massive piles of cauliflower that they do into fritters, and then they just cut them down and they hawk them. They come up every 20 minutes. They get something different. And they come with their baskets, and I love that bit because you're like, oh, what's inside? You lift up the kind of little cloth they've got, like, oh, it's chicken lollipop, oh, it's crispy pakoras, it's onion bhaji, it's fresh biryani in a clay pot with yogurt on the side and a little plastic bag of onions and chilies, and oh my God, it's like a kind of rolling dream. And the passengers on board are so fun. Everybody sits and chats to everyone. They want to know your business. They, always want to suggest where you should go when you reach the other end. And it's just so chilled and laid back because it's, all the compartments are, in sort of general class or third or second where I travel, are sleeper berths. So if you get on it really early at 7 a.m., and it's an open compartment, so they're all berths, but they're open. You can sort
Yeah.
of wander from one to the next. They're not closed off with doors. You get on at 7, about 8:30, just fancy a doze. You can climb up into your berth, sleep for an hour and a half, and then come down and join in again. And it's the best. And I've done this before when I've been jet lagged and arrived in Bombay. I've slept for like a couple of hours, and you get up at 10 a.m., think, right, I'm ready for breakfast, I'm ready for the coffees, and now I can join in. And
Yeah.
then by about 3 or 4, it's warm, and you think, a little snooze in the afternoon, and it's ideal. You can
Oh,
read, you can chat to people, you can play cards, and you've just got this. It really is one of the most scenic routes in India, without a doubt. Goes through, once you kind of reach Goa, you get these kind of jungles of coconut groves and palm trees, and then you go over the highest viaduct in India,
mm.
and the sea is right below you. And when you're sitting in an open doorway, it's you have that kind of feeling of, I would never do this if I was at home, but somehow in a way it makes you like, "That's fine, I can do this." It's
Oh,
not
good.
a massive safety problem. It's got everything that I love about trains. It's got the dining car, it's got the scenery, it's got the fun people, it's comfortable, you can sleep. It's all the components kind of come together to just
Mhm.
make the best journey. And I think I've done it 4 times now since 2010. Every time I go back to India, I find some reason to go back and do the journey again. It is really is the one train. Whenever people go to India and they say, "Would you recommend one?" I always recommend that one, particularly because if you start or finish in Bombay or Goa, there's so much to do at either end. They're such key places.
Mm.
It's just a kind of treat that you happen to end up in them.
It sounds perfection. That is
It
absolutely.
really is, like, from I think I've probably done about 200 plus journeys in the last 15 years, and it really does still stick out as the one that I remember all the time for so many different reasons.
Yeah, yeah. It does, like you say, have all those components. If it's got people, food, scenery, and the timing is pretty decent as well. I love that.
7 a.m., and then you get in at around 7 in time for dinner and then bed, and it's also really reasonable. That's the other thing. Price-wise, I think it's something like £17 or something. I can't think what that is in dollars off the top of my head, but it's like nothing when you compare how much a 12-hour, like, sleeper berth would be anywhere else in the world. It's just nothing, and you can get it for as little as £5 if you're in just a regular seating carriage at the other end.
I wanna do this now. This sounds brilliant. I have a big gap in my travel life in that I have not yet been to India, and there's no good
Oh my
reason for it at
gosh.
all, but I know.
Oh, well, you have so much waiting.
I know. It's very high on the list, and that train journey sounds like my perfect day out. So, I think there are many, many listeners to the Thoughtful Travel podcast who are train lovers because, well, why wouldn't you be? It makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, like, but also I think there's like a big overlap between traveling thoughtfully and taking trains for
Yeah.
lots and lots of reasons. So, what do you think this means? Like, what's your definition of being a thoughtful traveler?
Well, for me, my travels aren't about getting from A to B. They never have been. For me, the moment I get on board, I'm very aware of where I am, and I think that's, to me, what's essential about your travels. It's not just about you. It's not just about where you're going. It's not where you've come from. It's about everything that kind of comes together with how you're moving through the world. And from the second I get on a train, I'm just so mindful of who's sitting around me. I'm also really aware now, much more so in the last few years since I've been doing these trips, of the origins of these trains as well, how they
Mm.
came about, because so much of the world's railways came about through actually really dark, nefarious reasons.
Oh, wow.
Um, so
Yeah.
many railways around the world came from colonization. They came from colonizers wanting to build the railways to essentially plunder everything from these countries and move them quickly. Indian Railways literally came about because the British wanted to centralize their rule. They wanted to govern people more efficiently. They wanted to speed up the plunder of cotton and iron and everything else. They wanted to just basically thieve from India and get it out of there fast. And
Yeah.
the Indian taxpayer funded the railways, and they weren't even allowed to travel in those carriages with the British until much, much later on. And so this is all part of my kind of thoughtful travel, that I am not just blissfully traveling through these places with no understanding of where they came from. I really started to think about it after when I did Around the World in 80 Trains, I met a former, he was a prisoner of war of the Japanese during the Second World War. And he was an amazing gentleman called Sir Harold, actually. He was a British prisoner of war who was kept in Changi and then transported up to build the Burma Railway, which was intended to run up to India, but it never happened. The railway is now called, it's kind of nicknamed the Death Railway because there was one person died for every single sleeper that was laid.
Oh,
And he was one of the few people, I mean, I think 12,000 people died
yeah.
building the railway. And he was one of the few survivors who actually spent 9 months building the railway and then only survived because of the Hiroshima bomb and the end of the war. And I went to meet him and he taught me, he'd kept a diary. He couldn't keep anything in writing through the 9 months that he was put to work because if the Japanese had found it, he would have been killed immediately. But he documented everything before and everything after. And he was 97 when I met him, and I sat with him in his flat in London before I went traveling, and he told me everything he could recall. And then he said, you go out there, you visit the railway, you ride it, and you come back and tell me what you think. And when I was actually on the train, which still has a route that runs from Bangkok up to Namtok, and then at the end there's a memorial and a museum, actually built by Australians. He asked me about it when I came back, and when I was actually traveling, all I could think about was every clack of the train across those sleepers was that somebody had died for every single one of them. And I looked around at all the people on board, and there were just loads of regular families and travelers, and I thought, I wonder how many people actually in this carriage are aware of the history of this, because there's nothing there. There's nothing on the route that tells you anything about it. You just get on. It's a really stunning journey. It goes over the bridge on the River Kwai. It's spectacular. It goes through the jungle. It's such a beautiful journey, and I couldn't enjoy it at any point without constantly thinking about Sir Howard and all of his colleagues who had perished on that train. And since that time, I've just always read into where the railways came about, who they were built by, and invariably it's got a really dark history to it. So for me, it's being thoughtful is about, I think a lot of the time I find with travelers, they sometimes don't want to know about these things. They're not, they feel like it might taint their experience or just make it a bit miserable. But I've never found that. I never feel like I don't want to do a trip, or I'm not put off by something, and I don't feel guilty about where I'm traveling. I just think it enhances your experience of the whole journey because you're much more aware of your surroundings. When you know the history, it does seep into your appreciation of where you are. And I think that's, for me, that's what makes train travel thoughtful. Is also being aware of the people that you're currently traveling with too, because when you're in trains in a country, you are surrounded immediately by people who will give you insight instantly into a country's culture, into its politics, into, the way people eat, the things that upset them, the way countries work. You get that very first-hand knowledge from people. And it's almost like traveling inside a guidebook because people will tell you straight away, they'll ask you, where are you staying when you get to the city? And you say here, and they're like, no, don't go there. This is where you should be staying, and this is why. Or they will tell you what you should eat and which restaurant you should go to and which site is too touristic and maybe you should visit this one instead. And it's that for me that all ties together as what makes thoughtful travel. It doesn't take much either. I don't feel like you have to do masses and masses of research into these things. It's often just a little bit of thought. It's just a little bit of consideration.
Yeah.
That can completely transform your experience of something. Once you are aware of certain things, they do all tie together. And for me, train travel is really the essence of thoughtful travel, I think. Aside from the fact that, I stopped calling it climate change now. Climate crisis is so relevant. It's impossible to be a thoughtful traveler and to not be aware of that and to not try and adapt to ways of transport that kind of at least reduce your carbon footprint to some degree. I know that trains are still, contributing to harmful things in the atmosphere, but
less.
Yeah, just something. If I can change that even a little bit, then I feel like I've done something that's just a bit more thoughtful, I guess, towards the way I'm moving around. I've also found that since lockdown, people who traveled a lot became very aware of the fact that flying or not flying was obviously causing things showing that the atmosphere was much better for it. We all knew that. And the demise of certain budget airlines showed that. And I really have, when I've spoken to people on trains, especially in Europe, that they are very, very, very aware of the climate crisis. And so many people have made a very conscious decision not to fly anymore
Mm.
in a way that I don't think people in the UK care quite so much. I mean, in the UK, people will sort of talk about it, but I don't think anyone really does anything that practical.
Mhm.
I really felt when I was researching Moonlight Express that in Scandinavia, everybody will tell you straight away, "I don't fly. I've completely given up. I haven't for 6 or 7 years."
Wow.
You know, and they'll look at you, they'll shrug when I'd said, "Why do you take trains so much?" And they'll just look like, "Climate, duh, obviously." Like, and I was really taken aback by it, that they are so aware of the situation, and they are really, really pragmatic about saying, "No, we will absolutely take trains."
Wonderful.
I met so many people who just said, "I've just completely stopped flying,"
Yeah.
which I guess for them being actually on the continent is fine, but for being in the UK, where we unfortunately are still a very little island, we have
Yes.
to get the Eurostar. It does limit us a little bit, but I think once you're actually in the mainland continent, it's
Yeah.
easy to get everywhere, and it's joyous being able to thread around so easily. In 4 or 5 hours, you're over a border and in another country again, and
Absolutely.
why would you fly? Why would you do that to yourself if you didn't have to? Because I mean, when you think about the time it takes you to get to an airport,
Mhm.
you've got to factor in a couple of hours for check-in, security, the faff of just bags and scanning and liquids and all that, just nightmare.
Yep.
And then get to the other end, invariably you're on the outskirts of a city, you have to queue
Mhm.
up taxis, it takes you another hour to get in. In that time, you can just go to a station in the heart of a city, get straight on, and you're fired like an arrow straight into the
Yeah.
center of another city, and you're there. Yeah, I think I genuinely think about all these things when I'm moving around, and if I can avoid flying, I absolutely do. So many things. That's a long answer.
It's a fabulous answer, touching so many very interesting points. But I mean, absolutely, that's very heartening to hear when you're in mainland Europe that you've been hearing people say, "Yeah, of course I don't fly," as though it's just
So
such
much.
a yeah, brilliant.
It really is, and I think, after lockdown, Greta Thunberg, was promoting Flygskam, which is the Swedish word for flight shame, and I thought it was just a trend, but when I was traveling around, it was so common. It was just the given that
Yeah.
people around me said, "Well, obviously I don't, why would I fly? I've got trains everywhere, so I just don't." And I was really cheered to hear it, because I think there is so much people are very dismissive about climate change, and on the surface they want to change things and do things differently, but for the sake of ease they'll just get a 45-minute flight to Edinburgh instead of a 5-hour train. But they Europe, they don't. They absolutely don't. And so many, I mean, France has already said they're going to flights that are, more than 2 hours. It's just not going to happen. If you can do it by train, then they're going to make it that way. So, and I really do feel like a lot of people would do that were the trains efficient enough, and were there enough services,
Yeah.
and it's cost effective. I think that's really the thing that holds people back, is the
Yeah.
cost, and they are expensive. I mean, I'll be the first person to say that is true, and I wouldn't begrudge anybody who doesn't use railways, because it is very, very expensive, and I think that's the deciding factor for a lot of people. They really would
Absolutely.
use the trains. They would do it. But when it's prohibitively expensive and you're sometimes looking at 3, 4 times the cost of what it would be to fly,
Yeah.
I very much understand why people don't.
Especially if you're taking a family and it's like that cost just balloons out, doesn't it? And
Absolutely that, and I've experienced it firsthand myself when I've been traveling with my kids. I've got 2 children, and for the most part, I travel by myself when I've been researching my books. But for the purposes of research, I traveled with them, and we did a journey from London to Barcelona overground. So we did the Eurostar to Paris. We broke it up and had a night in Paris, and then we took a sleeper train from Paris down to the south of France, it was a really lovely journey. The kids had so much fun, but it was, 300 euros just for that sleeper trip.
yeah.
And then on the other end, it was, from France across the border into Barcelona. And at the end, plus the Eurostar for 4 of us, it was about £800 one way. And it was like £45 each with EasyJet to fly
Yeah.
back. And
Oh, it's a huge difference. Very hard to justify if
I can't say to a family, this is exactly how you should travel. Plus, it's the time factor. We took 3 days to get to Barcelona. You could do it in 2 to 3 hours. And when you don't have very much annual leave and you don't have the budget, it's absolutely understandable why people can't do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a real shame, because so many people I met along the way said they would if they could just to make it affordable for people.
It really should just be the other way around, that
Yeah,
the planes cost 4 or 5
absolutely.
times as much, so that's prohibitive, and that's really then just, I don't know, a very urgent business traveller who must get there quickly or
Yeah,
something, but for everyone else, yeah, we have
yeah.
the same problem in Australia. I mean, obviously, yeah, it's our flight shame is worse. In Western Australia, it's very hard to travel many places without getting on a plane.
No, I absolutely get it, yeah.
But even on the East Coast, so a couple of years ago, I took the train from Melbourne to Sydney because I needed to be in both. So I started in Melbourne and then I had to get to a conference in Sydney. And a friend who'd done that regularly, she's a climate scientist. So she's like very, very very, very keen on this approach. And she said, "Oh, I've done this. I know we're both going. We were going to this conference together. Let's do that." And so we did. But it's a full day. It's like more than 12
Wow.
hours. It's a very slow train. It has no Wi-Fi, things like that. So it's a very impractical journey. It was not expensive, but it was comparable to a cheap flight. It wasn't,
Mm,
it wasn't certainly not a cost saver. And we had a fabulous time because we could chat the whole way. But if I was going to do that regularly, that would be really impractical. And she, bless her, does do that regularly. But it's a very, very highly trafficked air route from Melbourne to Sydney. Throw a fast train on there, and that would be like a no-brainer to get thousands
yeah.
of people on that route. But nobody wants to.
It's such a shame because, I mean, it just makes me think about when I was in China, when I did around the world in 80 trains. I saw that there was a sort of overnight train from Beijing down to Shanghai, and it was, it was really, really cheap and totally doable. But I was just curious about the bullet train, and where the long sleeper took 12 to 13 hours, the bullet train was 5 hours, 20 minutes. And it was so sleek and it was so comfortable, and you barely noticed you're on board. There was Wi-Fi. The seats were like aeroplane seats. You could recline them. And I thought, well, this is why people are going to do this. This is the fastest way to do it. And there's no way anyone would fly. You absolutely wouldn't need to do that with both those options in place. And I did wonder whether with that bullet train, would the sleeper train even have any reason to exist anymore? But look, there are still people who can't afford the bullet train.
Right.
And you've got your regular laborers, commuters who still need this. So it caters to every demographic,
Nice.
but they're still on trains. And
Yes.
that's the upside of it. Everyone was still on the trains. And I just thought, oh, I just
I
wish that
know.
would be so much better for everyone. But
Yeah, it's like that kind of like Beijing to Shanghai, did you say?
mm,
If you imagine the faff of going to an airport at either end of those,
oh gosh, just
that would take the stress and the time and the everything, and a train's just so simple, and if we can just replicate that everywhere. If we ran the world,
we should.
oh, it would be fabulous.
Women in transport, we'd sort it all out.
We'd sort it all out. I don't know how to, build a train line or anything, but that's okay. We can have minions. So we've covered tons of reasons why train travel is amazing. One of my favorite reasons is the people, which you've touched on briefly, but I just want to go back to when we covered your Around the World in 80 Trains for one of our very first Thoughtful Travellers book clubs back. It was during lockdown actually as well, 2020. And I listened back to it a few weeks ago, and my co-host Justin and I were so upset by your fellow passenger in Russia somewhere, where
Oh, the ice cream.
you had gifted him a Magnum ice cream and he left it there and it melted. And I was like, oh, that's just such a tragedy. But I mean, I've also taken the Trans-Siberian from Vladivostok over to Moscow,
Oh, have
and
you?
yeah, back in
Wow.
2003. So it was an amazing trip,
Oh
but I
my
had
gosh.
a lot of very different, there was no other
Yeah.
tourists on the train.
No, I can't imagine.
And we met a lot of different Russians with a lot of, some were super friendly and some were, if I had given them a Magnum ice cream, they also would have let it melt. So, um, so I completely understand. But I'd love to hear some more about, some of the characters you've met along the way and, that beauty of meeting people on trains where you're trapped and you often have these, incredible conversations or lack of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he really was a character. I can still picture it now. It was just our way of literally breaking the ice with him. It was so hot because we were traveling. I mean, people, when they think of the Trans-Siberian or the Trans-Mongolian, they do often picture a very wintry train. But we were doing this in summer, and I remember so vividly, it was 38 degrees on board.
Oh,
The I mean, for us, that's really hot. It was the air conditioning was not working. The windows were open with kind of all kinds of pollen blowing in. And I remember just
Oh,
having atrocious hay fever, like sniffing away in my berth, just like piles of used tissues everywhere, just sad.
oh,
And and because I mean, we were there for literally for the long haul from Moscow to Irkutsk was 4 nights and 5 days.
mm.
We were still in Siberia, and then on to Ulaanbaatar, and then 2 more days to Beijing. But for the first day, because a lot of people, I mean, it's a commuting train. It's
Mm.
not for tourists, and we were the only non-Russians on board. And they'd also put us on the domestic train, not even the Rossiya service, which is what all the travelers take. So
Yeah.
we were kind of really domestic service, and so we had a real kind of revolving door of people for the first 7 or 8 hours until that evening. And I think he was the third or fourth person who came in, and he had white hair and a tash. And I remember him sitting by the window, and I kind of waved and said hi, and he didn't really do anything. And it was so hot that we got off and got ice cream. So we got this Magnum, and then we, my husband just said, what, just get him one because it's really hot. And I
Yeah.
said, yeah, sure, that'd be a nice way to make friends. I just offered it to him, and he sort of nodded and just laid it on the table, and he just didn't touch it. And it wasn't that he didn't bin it. That was the worst bit. He sat there on the table in front of us for about 4 hours. And we went to the dining car and we came back and it was still there and he hadn't put it in the bin and it was clearly melted. And I remember just looking at it thinking that's the clearest symbol of a friendship that is not being accepted. And he doesn't want anything to do with us. And it was almost like he was really making a point because he just wouldn't put it in the bin.
Yeah.
At least just chuck it out when we're
Yes,
not
at
here.
least yes, that's right. Take that moment to at least get rid of this
Please
awkward
take the
object.
visual kind of horror show away from me, but he didn't. And he left it until the evening, until finally when I was tidying, I was like, I'm just going to chuck it in the bin because I can't. I know you don't want to be friends. Stop reminding me every second of looking at this like damp Magnum that you don't want to be friends
The
with us.
magnum of rejection.
Oh my God. But he honestly, though, at least he was very much in the minority. And in fact, I
Yeah.
don't think I ever had an encounter like that again over that 8 months. I was so fortunate to come across the most varied and lovely and kind and generous people. And I know that kindness of strangers sort of trope is well worn, but it really is the case on trains. And I have found it everywhere I've been. And I think that probably I've realized now it's not just a sort of haphazard thing. I think people who travel on trains are of a certain disposition because you are around people a lot and you are around different people all the time. And you're in very shared communal spaces. It's very rare that you travel in private compartments. People who choose to travel in a 4-person or a 6-person couchette compartment, you've got strangers around you. You've got people sleeping above you, snoring beneath you. You've got someone sitting next to you, putting their socks on. And I think when you're traveling in that way, in that very, very kind of in a space where you have to basically trespass on each other's lives constantly,
Mm.
I think you are of the kind of nature that you do enjoy conversation. You do like meeting other people. You do like chatting and you're a social person. I think I found it very unusual to come across people who don't want to chat,
Mm.
shy away from having conversation or joining in on some kind of group discussion about something. It's almost unheard of, actually. But the people that I came across weren't just helpful or generous or any of these things. They were also insanely interesting. And I realized that every single person has got a story. Everybody, absolutely everyone has one, and you just have to find it. You just have to get them going. And some of the most unassuming people had done the most like hair-raising things. Even around you in sort of 2 to 3 minutes, you'll be like, oh wow, okay, so you're a runaway who left your family in Staten Island and you've just got on in Houston because you're meeting a friend in Joshua Tree. Okay. And this was on an American train. This was on the train. It was the train that went from New Orleans to LA. It's the Sunset Limited, which is one of the oldest services in the US.
Nice.
And this young woman got on in Houston. First, she asked me what time the train was leaving, and I just said, I don't know. I'm literally a passenger. And she clearly thought I worked on it because she kept asking me these mad questions. And then I found her in the dining car, and she'd got on, and she said, "I'm meeting a friend in Joshua Tree." And I said, "Where are you from?" And she'd Staten Island, and she said, "Yeah, my family are just trailer trash." And I just left. I just basically left because I couldn't live with them anymore. And at the same time, we met a dad on that train who had fallen out with his daughter. They were really estranged, but she was getting married in California. And she told him, and she'd said, "Come."
Oh.
So he was on his way to meet her and her fiance for the first time at the wedding and patch things up. And
Oh.
then there was another chef on board who had got to take the train because he'd got drunk and had his license taken away from him. Then there was a whole series of guys who were like, I don't know if you've seen Coming to America, but they were literally like all the guys in the barber shop. There was six of them sitting around screaming with laughter about this guy's dog, and he got a mastiff, and they were just making fun of him, saying it was the ugliest dog that they'd ever seen. And, he was thinking, I can't believe you paid that much money. I'd expect it to go and buy me beer if I'd spent that. And I was just sort of crying with laughter, listening to this conversation. And you literally get what could be TV scripts from people.
Yeah.
So many times I would just sit there scribbling down what they were saying with my back to them, thinking, one day I will do a TV show and put all of this in. This is just gold dust. I think that's what, as much as people were actively friendly and they were generous and would offer me food, or they would let me share snacks and give me advice on where to go, it was also those interactions for me that were wonderful, that people allowed me to be listening to that. They would let you just sit around listening to their conversations, or just, wander into their compartment and let you sit down and just join in on it. And there's something really generous about that. Even if you're not actively giving people things, you're giving them your time, your insights, your conversation. I absolutely love that about people. There was a Tibetan nun who happened to just be walking past while the three of us were sitting in a compartment, and she was wildly banging on the door, gesturing at me, and I couldn't figure out why, because she didn't speak any English. She was speaking only in, I think, Mandarin, actually. And when she came in, she was just jabbering at me and smiling away and kept pointing and pointing, until this very sweet pregnant woman next door came round and said, "I can interpret." And she said, "She's asking if you're Indian. She wants to know if you're Indian." And so I thought, I'm not going to complicate things by saying I'm British, but Indian origin. I just said, "Yes, I am." And she's very excited because she wants to thank you for looking after the Dalai Lama.
Oh, bless.
My photographer, Mark, who's half Indian, his dad is Indian, his mom is Welsh, he was like, did she just say what I think she said? And I said, yes, she thinks that we've looked after the Dalai Lama. And he's like, that is amazing. Because we'd just been in Tibet. We'd just come back from Lhasa. And Mark he was just that minute editing photographs of the Potala Palace in Lhasa, where the Dalai Lama had lived before he escaped. And she came in and sat down. And I've got this hilarious photo of her just chattering at Mark in Chinese. He doesn't know what he's saying, but she was just overjoyed by the pictures, because she could never go back to Lhasa again after she left. And she was just so excited to be in the compartment. And she was there for almost an hour. And none of us said anything to each other that anybody understood. And yet it was one of the best encounters I've ever had. She was just so full of joy and radiated this happiness and excitement, and she just had this real kind of zest for life, and she found everything really funny, and it was just
gorgeous.
It was so delightful being around someone, just feeling that positivity from her, even though none of us spoke. No one knew what anybody was saying. And yet then she called us to the compartment, and she tied a little Buddha on a red string around each of our wrists before she got off the train. And the best bit was, she wanted to exchange numbers with us. And I didn't know how to put the number in because her phone was in Chinese. And she took my phone off me and tutted and showed me how to scan a QR code. And then share her contact details. And I just thought, oh God, I love that I've got a Tibetan nun who's teaching me how to use an iPhone.
Gorgeous.
But just that interaction with her, it completely upended my whole, I guess, my kind of presumptions about people.
That's amazing. I have one last question for you. Of course, in the near future, we're going to catch up with you to talk about your amazing new book. And I keep getting the name wrong. Moonlight Express.
You want to say Midnight Express?
Because I keep saying Midnight Express.
You know what? Funnily enough, that the working title originally was Midnight Express. And then
I must know that somewhere.
Then I had a moment of, what on earth would you call it after the most violent movie about, taking people dying? Just no. And actually, do you know what? The title Moonlight Express, actually, it came from a friend while I was on board a train.
Ooh, Right.
Yeah, we were traveling from Brussels to Berlin. He's an old friend. He's my daughter's godfather, and he basically cracked open a can of beer in the darkness when we were in the berth. It's like, are you literally drinking in bed? And he's like, yeah, it's the best time for it. He's like, look, the fans don't work. The curtain blind is broken, so I'm just going to have to sit in bed and stare out the window. And why not? Because we'd just gone through Rotterdam and Amsterdam, and all the lights were out. It was really beautiful. And he's flipped off the light, and the moonlight just came flooding right across the compartment. And he was quite drunk at this point. He's very comical when he's pissed. And he just said, he's like, oh, this is nice. He's like, oh, I can get used to this. He's like, it's like traveling on a Moonlight Express. And I remember just lying in my berth and I thought, that's what it has to be called. That's the name of the book. It's the Moonlight Express. And you know, it's funny, actually, as I was traveling along, I did spend a lot of time staring at the moon because it was always there. It was always there alongside me wherever we were. And it was, in various different guises. But
I'll never get the title mixed up again now because I'll have this image in my head of your drunken friend and the moonlit cabin.
Yeah, cracking open a can at 11:30 at night. Like, oh God, you're going to get up 17 times to go to the toilet. And
that's the number one reason I would not do that at that time.
5 times in the night till so I'm going to get up anyway, so you better get used to it. It's like, great, there you go. But it's all part and parcel of being on a sleeper train. You just have to accept these things about people. Get your eye mask on, get your earplugs in, and just deal with it.
Yes, I mean, I love sleeper trains. That I absolutely love. I sometimes wish that my bedroom could have that atmosphere and the ka-clunk, 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 ka-clunk. Like, I still maintain I've had all the best night's sleep in my life on sleeper trains.
It can be really soothing, that rocking sensation. And actually, I did kind of look this up. The rocking sensation is very similar to being in the womb. I mean, that's why babies sleep so much during the day. Like when I was pregnant with both kids, I used to get quite panicked when there was no movement. When you're pottering around during the day and you think, oh, hang on, nothing's happened, and you sort of give them a shove on one side, and then suddenly you get this kind of, oh, don't do that to me. And then you realize they sleep all day because of the motion. And only when I would sit down and I was ready for bed, then they'd come to life. You're like, oh God, no, don't. I want to sleep. Now is not the time to be somersaulting around. But that rocking is very kind of, it's very calming.
That makes sense that there's that connection. Yeah, I just absolutely love it. So I cannot wait to talk to you more about sleeper trains, but I just as a little teaser, what is your most favorite part of sleeper train travel?
A dining car. That's the best bit. So for me, it's not a proper sleeper train unless there's a dining car on board. God, I love that place so much. It is, but it's not just the food, but the dining car is the beating heart of a train, because when everyone's got on board sort of 7, 8 in the evening, you sort of unload your bags and you're all sitting around and you're sort of settling in. But when you've got that dining car, everyone just immediately decamps to that place, because even if you're not eating, people will sit without food, without drinks, just on their phone, because it's like a communal hub. And it's that sense of belonging. You're all moving along. You've all come together on this train. And again, there's a very unique sense of community on board a sleeper train, because once you guys are on, you're there for the long haul. You're all in it together tomorrow morning. You all want to sleep. You don't want it to be noisy. You don't want any fights. You don't want drunkenness. People do work together with it. I see it so much in a way that you absolutely do not see on planes. Everyone wants to be helpful. They will step around each other. They will make way for people's bags. They will help you stack your luggage. Yeah, people want to make the journey enjoyable for everybody around them. And when you're in the dining car, it's the place where everybody makes friends. Even if you're a solo traveler, you will find somebody to chat to in there. Even if it's just another solo traveler, but people will just call you over. And I was recently on a sleeper train in Norway again. I enjoyed it so much. I went back this summer with my kids and my husband this time. I just wanted them to see how great it was. And when they'd gone to bed, I stayed up, and it was about 12:30, and it's during the midnight sun. So it really wasn't dark, by any measure. And there was another solo traveler he was great fun. He had this giant tattoo of a tiger on his upper arm. He got a baseball cap covered in paint. He had this vest top on, and they are always the most interesting people. Those guys have got the best stories. And he was, I love the way he phrased it. He was doing deliveries, I say in inverted commas, in Ukraine. in Ukraine. He'd been doing military deliveries in Kiev
Wow.
and just come back, and he was on his way to one of his many houses in Trondheim. Like, he was clearly a mercenary, but he told me how he used to travel on trains in couchettes with his mom when he was a kid.
Oh.
Like, he was in his 50s, late 50s, and he said, I could get the day train, but I just really like this. And he said, I didn't even book a berth. He said, I've literally just got on at 11 o'clock at night in Oslo and just said to the manager, is there a berth free? And he said, yeah. And he literally paid for it with like contactless in front of me when he got on, and said, he showed me the receipt and he said, it's probably the same as you paid 7 months ago. And I said, actually, it's a bit cheaper. That's annoying. I was really irritating. I like really booked in advance and made sure I'd got it. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. There's always seats.
I just rocked up. Yeah.
It was just so nice in there. And he said, I always end up chatting to people like this when I'm on the train. And that's why I do it. He said, I traveled as a kid with my mom. My dad used to be away a lot for work. So we would do this. And he said, I just like it because it reminds me of when I did it with her. And he would describe the train. He said, obviously it's very new now and it's very different, but he's like, I like being here. It smelt. So they have rotating frankfurters in the kitchen bit, and it smelt of that again. And I remembered it from 2 years earlier. And I came in thinking, I remember that flashback feeling of smelling the frankfurter last time, and it was still there. The smell was the same. I looked to see if it was the train manager. It was someone slightly different, but he had a great beard and he looked like he'd been written into a book. But it was so lovely because there was a pair of students who were wearing like flannel slippers and drinking Coke. There were two people playing chess. There was this really cool, really elderly woman with a giant plate of mash and two sausages rattling across it. And I was like, what, boss? I just wanted to high five her. I was like, I love that it's 12:30 at night and you're here with this massive plate. And she just looked so happy in there. And I thought, I really want to be like you, like this one day, just eating giant sausage at 1 a.m. in a train compartment by yourself. And you could see that she was just content being around just random people. You could come and go. I'm sure people would have been there till 2 or 3 a.m. It was just that feeling of, we are going somewhere. We all know we're heading to Trondheim. We'll get there at 6:30, but we're here now, and this is our space. So for me, that dining car is thing. I've had some of the best conversations in there. I also get to chat to train managers in there, because when everyone's kind of filtered off and done their thing, those guys have got stories. My God.
I can imagine, yeah.
I mean, especially at night, they deal with all kinds of passengers. They would tell me some brilliant stories. And the amazing thing I found was that most of them have been on board for years.
Right.
They don't just do this like 2 or 3 years, decades, like actual decades. And the one in Norway said, I've literally been here for like 30 years. And they love it. They absolutely love the job. And I love that. I just thought it's so rare to find anyone that loves their job. But these guys really did. And they said, look, firstly, they get paid more by doing it at night, but they get extra leave. So when they've done a nice trip, they have 3 days off. They have that. Loads of them had families who worked in the railways. And they said, we just get to chat to people. They said, we meet such lovely people on board. We're never bored. You know, we potter around doing our thing, but from around midnight till about 4, we don't really have to do much. And, you know, it's just a lovely trip. It's just a lovely thing to do. And I didn't find a single train manager who had anything crappy to say about their jobs at all. They really enjoyed it. It's just a good place to get stories, really, which is what I'm all hunt for.
Exactly. Yeah, same. Yeah. Well, I cannot wait to hear more about sleeper trains. It's been a few years since I've been on one, and so I'm going to be.
Well, we'll have to change that.
Yes. I know. I realised my son, who's 15, has never been on a sleeper train, and I think that really makes me a pretty bad parent. So I have to change that very soon. Oh, I really am determined to take a sleeper train again soon. If you're listening live, you can join our book club with Monisha on the 10th of October, 2025. If you're listening later, you'll be able to watch or listen to the recording, so I'll update the links in the show notes after that date. I'll also leave a link to my episode about taking the train from Melbourne to Sydney with Susanna Etty. It's episode 313, because we recorded, little snippets live along the way on the train. Gives you a good feel for the journey. And of course, I've got some links to Monisha's fabulous books as well. So thank you so much for listening to episode 365 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A massive thanks to Monisha, who spoke with me late one evening, her time in the UK, in the middle of her book launch month. Really very busy, and I'm really grateful for that fabulous chat. In the links, a big thanks to Monisha at monisharajesh.com. Obviously, you can find all her info there. There is, of course, a link, as I said, to the upcoming book club or to the recording of the book club. notaballerina.com/313 for the Train Travel in Australia episode, and links to Monisha's 3 fabulous train books, Around India in 80 Trains, Around the World in 80 Trains, and Moonlight Express, not Midnight Express, Around the World by Night Train. Of course, I also have links to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups, so just search for Thoughtful Travellers on those platforms. Join the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at Substack. That's thoughtfultravel.substack.com. There's also, if you are keen on the book club, a separate mailing list for the Thoughtful Travellers Book Club, just that will advise you on what books we're reading and when our book club meetings will be. So link in the show notes for them as well. And all of this and more, including some pics of my own sleeper train and long-distance train travel, at the show notes at notaballerina.com/365. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.